Have you ever been told without words that you didn't belong somewhere? That a seat, a space, a moment wasn't meant for you, even though you'd earned it? Imagine stepping onto a plane with your ticket in hand, only to be pushed aside because of how you look. No shouting, no chaos at first, just the sting of silent judgment, a stranger's entitlement, and the cold realization that others are willing to believe them over you. But what happens when the person being humiliated isn't just another passenger, but the very CEO who owns the airline? What choice do you make then? Stand in silence, or reveal a truth that flips power on its head? This story forces us to ask, if it were you in that seat, what would you do? Would you fight back in anger, or would you use restraint so sharp that it leaves no room for doubt? Stay with us as we uncover not just an incident in the sky, but a turning point in how dignity, justice, and leadership can change everything. If this makes you pause, please like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The terminal at Los Angeles International buzzed with the low hum of travelers, but at Gate 47 there was a calm pocket of stillness. Outside the wide glass windows, an Aerosky Airways Boeing 787 gleamed under the California morning sun. Its silver fuselage reflected streaks of light across the tarmac. For most people, this flight to New York was just another business trip or weekend getaway. But for one woman, it was something much heavier, something that would change the course of an airline and perhaps the industry itself. She arrived without fanfare. No entourage, no designer luggage stacked on gold carts, no noise announcing her presence. Just a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, and well-worn Converse sneakers. A leather laptop bag hung from her shoulder. She walked with a measured calm, scrolling casually through her phone as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Her name was Dr. Aaliyah Monroe. To anyone in the terminal, she looked like any ordinary traveler, maybe even someone running late for a flight. But behind that calm face was the founder and CEO of Monroe Dynamics, a company that had redefined aerospace engineering over the past decade. What no one at the gate seemed to know was that, just last quarter, Aaliyah had secured majority ownership of Aerosky Airways itself. 52% of the entire company rested in her portfolio. She wasn't just a passenger, she was the owner. And yet, that wasn't what people saw when they looked at her. Inside the jet bridge, a flight attendant was already adjusting her blazer, ready to greet the morning's first-class passengers. Her name was Victoria Hale, the lead attendant for the flight. Victoria had worked in the industry for nearly 2 decades, long enough to memorize the subtle codes of wealth, the designer labels, the tailored suits, the polished shoes that seemed to glow under cabin lights. She knew how to spot who belonged in first class. When she caught a glimpse of Aaliyah stepping aboard, Victoria's brows furrowed almost instinctively. Something about the hoodie, the sneakers, the lack of makeup, the casual air. It didn't fit the unspoken image of their elite clientele. She leaned slightly toward the co-pilot, who was running a last-minute system check near the door. "Do we have a last-minute addition on the manifest?" Victoria whispered. The co-pilot shook his head. "Not that I know of." Victoria straightened and smoothed the front of her uniform. The engines were still silent, the cabin filled only with the smell of freshly wiped leather seats and the faint citrus of disinfectant. The first-class section was mostly empty, save for a middle-aged couple seated toward the back, their designer briefcases stacked neatly by their legs. Richard and Margaret Whitman, names that often popped up in business sections of newspapers, were already flipping through financial magazines. Aaliyah stepped inside the cabin like she had walked into countless aircraft before. No hesitation, no flash of insecurity. She placed her carry-on into the overhead bin and slid into seat 2A with an ease that suggested it was hers. But Victoria didn't see confidence. She saw intrusion. She moved down the aisle with practiced authority. Her voice dipped in politeness but edged with steel. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, stopping at Aaliyah's row. "This section is reserved for our first-class passengers." Aaliyah didn't look up right away. She tucked her phone into her pocket, then finally met Victoria's eyes. "I know," she said softly. Something in that calm reply irritated Victoria more than she could explain. It didn't sound defensive, but it didn't sound deferential either. Just steady. "I'm not sure you do," Victoria continued, her lips curling into the kind of smile that looked pleasant but felt like a warning. "This flight is a private-level service. We don't usually have passengers board dressed quite like this." From the galley, another voice chimed in before Aaliyah could answer. A younger attendant, Daniel Brooks, barely 27 and still finding his footing in the industry, called out, "She's on the manifest. Victoria! Top of the list!" Victoria froze. Her polished smile wavered for half a beat. She glanced at the tablet in her hand, scrolling quickly, and yes, there it was. Passenger 2A, Dr. Aaliyah Monroe. "I see," she said finally, masking her surprise. Aaliyah leaned back into her seat, crossing one leg over the other. She wasn't smug, wasn't boastful, just tired. Tired of this exact moment, replayed in different versions across hotel lobbies, conference rooms, even restaurants where servers had handed the wine list to anyone but her. She didn't push back. She didn't have to. The air itself seemed to shift, as if everyone in the cabin felt the tension, but wasn't sure why. Victoria lingered a moment longer, her mind racing with quiet doubt. Something about this didn't add up. A hoodie and sneakers in seat 2A. A name on the manifest she didn't recognize. There had to be a mistake, she told herself. But it wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of a story she would regret being part of for the rest of her life. Victoria Hale couldn't let it go. Even after confirming Dr. Aaliyah Monroe's name on the manifest. Unease clung to her chest like static. Years in the industry had sharpened her instincts, and her instincts screamed that something was off. It wasn't just the clothes, though the faded hoodie and scuffed sneakers grated on her sense of order. It was the way Aaliyah sat there, so composed, as if the seat didn't need to be earned or explained. That confidence, wrapped in simplicity, rattled Victoria more than any forged ticket ever had. She leaned closer to the galley where Daniel Brooks was stowing service trays. "Something's not right," she whispered, keeping her voice low enough that only he could hear. Daniel looked up, already wary. "She's on the list. Victoria." "I checked twice." Victoria's lips thinned. "Names can be faked. Documents can be swapped. I've been around long enough to know when a passenger doesn't fit the profile." Daniel tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. "What profile first class doesn't have a dress code?" "Maybe not written down," Victoria muttered. "But it's understood. People who belong here well. You can tell." Daniel's brow furrowed. He wanted to argue, but the steady hum of boarding distracted him. The Whitmans, seated 2 rows behind Aaliyah, had been glancing forward more than once, their curiosity disguised behind lifted newspapers. Margaret leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Just loud enough for the sound to carry." "Does she work here?" "She doesn't look like." Richard hushed her quickly, though his eyes betrayed the same thought. They weren't used to seeing someone like Aaliyah occupy space so calmly in the world they believed belonged to them. Aaliyah, of course, noticed. Years of walking into rooms where she wasn't expected had trained her senses to catch every flicker of doubt, every sidelong glance. She didn't flinch. She simply pulled her leather laptop bag onto her lap and began typing a few lines into a document already open. The soft clack of keys became her shield. Her silent declaration, "I don't need your permission to exist here." Inside, though, her mind churned. Not with anger, she had outgrown the impulse to react explosively, but with the heaviness of repetition. Again, she thought. It's always again. No matter the city, no matter the setting, the assumption never changes. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Tomorrow morning. She would be presenting a new initiative at Aerosky's shareholder meeting in New York, a sweeping reform package designed to confront bias in the airline industry itself. Irony wasn't lost on her. Tonight, she was living the very story she planned to challenge tomorrow. Victoria watched her closely, crossing her arms as if standing guard. To her, something still didn't add up. She stepped toward Aaliyah's row again, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Ma'am," she said more firmly, "I need to verify your identification. Just a quick look, for security purposes." Daniel nearly dropped the napkins he was folding. "Victoria, come on. We've already cleared her." But Victoria pressed forward, lowering her voice so passengers wouldn't hear the tremor of suspicion lace through it. "This flight carries high-profile clients. Protocol requires diligence. We can't have surprises at 30,000 feet." Aaliyah looked up slowly, her fingers pausing on the laptop keys. Her eyes met Victoria's without flinching. Protocol doesn't involve singling out passengers who've already been cleared. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was precise, like a scalpel cutting away pretense. The quiet authority in her voice startled even Daniel, who had never seen a passenger handle Victoria so directly. "I'm only trying to protect our clients," Victoria insisted. Aaliyah raised one brow. "And which clients are you protecting me from?" That question landed heavier than Victoria expected. For a moment, she had no answer. Her gaze flicked back to the Whitmans, who were suddenly very interested in their magazines again. She swallowed hard. "Just procedure," she murmured, though the conviction was gone from her words. Daniel stepped in quickly, sensing the standoff was veering toward something ugly. "Victoria!" The ground team confirmed her status. HQ cleared it. "We're wasting time. Let's let it go." But Victoria didn't let it go. She couldn't. Something inside her refused to release the tension, even as she felt the edges of her professional facade fraying. Aaliyah closed her laptop with deliberate calm. She set it gently on the tray table, folded her hands, and looked Victoria square in the eye. "If you're going to keep questioning me," she said softly, "at least be honest about why." The words sank like stones in a still pond. Victoria blinked, her cheeks heating. She opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came. The silence between them was sharper than any outburst could have been. For the first time in years, Victoria felt uncertain in her own cabin, and Aaliyah, sitting in seat 2O as if it had always been hers, exhaled quietly and turned her gaze toward the window. The engines outside hummed to life, but inside, the tension was only just beginning to build. The cabin filled slowly with the soft shuffle of passengers settling into their seats. Overhead bins clicked shut, seatbelts snapped into place, and the low murmur of voices blended with the faint hum of air conditioning. Yet in row 2A, silence carried more weight than sound. Aaliyah Monroe sat with her hands folded on her lap. her eyes fixed on the pattern of clouds drifting past the wide oval window. Outwardly, she looked serene. Inside, her thoughts spun like gears. Here it comes again, she told herself. The same script, different stage. It doesn't matter how many boardrooms I've owned, how many contracts I've signed, how many billions I've raised. To someone, I'll always be a question mark that doesn't belong. Her chest tightened briefly, but she exhaled through it. Years of practice had taught her the art of composure, the ability to hold dignity when it was being stripped away piece by piece. She had grown used to the contradictions building planes that crossed oceans while still being asked if she could afford her own seat. 2 rows back, Richard and Margaret Whitman lowered their magazines just enough to watch the unfolding scene. Margaret leaned closer to her husband. "She doesn't even have proper luggage," she whispered, her voice dripping with disbelief. "I bet she slipped past security somehow." Richard nodded faintly, but didn't speak. His eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, lingered on Aaliyah with the same suspicion. Aaliyah heard them. Of course she did. The space between rows wasn't large enough to muffle prejudice, but she didn't turn. She kept her focus on the horizon outside, a faint line of gold where the sun had begun to rise. Victoria Hale, standing near the galley, watched the exchange and felt her conviction harden. If the Whitmans saw it too, then surely she wasn't imagining things. Surely she wasn't the only one who thought this woman didn't fit. She leaned toward Daniel Brooks, her junior colleague. "You see how she ignored me, how she brushed me off. Something's not right." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had watched the entire interaction, and what he saw wasn't arrogance, it was patience. The kind that came from living through moments like this too often. "She's cleared," he said flatly. "Let it go." Victoria. But Victoria couldn't. Her pride, her years of authority in the cabin, her instinct to categorize passengers into neat boxes, all of it was being challenged by this one woman who didn't play by the unspoken rules. She smoothed her blazer and adjusted her scarf, preparing to approach again. Meanwhile, Aaliyah reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. The cover was worn, the corners softened by time. She opened to a half-filled page and scribbled a line with a black pen. The words weren't notes for her shareholder meeting tomorrow. They were Thought's private reminders she often jotted down in moments like these. Strength is not in how loud you answer. It's in how steady you remain when others try to shake you. She paused, stared at the sentence, then closed the book quietly. Daniel noticed and felt a pang of respect. He didn't know who she really was yet, but he sensed something unshakable in her demeanor. He turned back to the galley, busying himself with folding napkins that didn't need folding, anything to mask the unease that had started to fill the cabin. The Whitmans whispered again, their voices low but sharp. "First class is for people who've earned it," Margaret muttered. "Not just anyone can sit up here." The words pricked at Aaliyah, but she didn't let them through. Not fully. She had heard variations of the same sentence her whole life, at airports, at hotels, at restaurants, even in boardrooms, whispered behind closed doors. Does she really belong here? She shifted slightly in her seat, her back straighter now, her eyes no longer on the window but forward, calm and present. Victoria finally approached. Her heels clicked against the floor with a rhythm that sounded more like judgment than service. She stopped beside Aaliyah's row, tilting her head with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am," she said, her voice lower this time, "you'll have to understand. We don't usually get passengers showing up dressed informally. For a flight of this caliber, appearances matter. People notice. Aaliyah blinked once, her expression unchanged. So, the problem is my clothes. I didn't say that, Victoria replied quickly. But the flush in her cheeks betrayed her. You didn't have to, Aaliyah said softly. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was measured, controlled, like a calm sea hiding its depths. The silence that followed made Daniel's skin prickle. He stepped out from the galley, positioning himself closer to them. Victoria, that's enough. We've cleared her. We're wasting time. But Victoria wasn't done. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Aaliyah could hear. You may have fooled the manifest, but you can't fool me. I know when someone doesn't belong. Aaliyah's eyes lifted to meet hers directly. Steady, clear. Belonging isn't yours to give, she said. The words hit harder than any raised voice could. Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the calm certainty. Her throat tightened, but before she could respond, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing pre-flight checks. The tension in the cabin didn't ease. It thickened, pressing down on every seat like invisible weight. The Whitmans pretended to return to their reading, though their hands trembled slightly with each page turn. Daniel busied himself with trivial tasks, but his eyes kept darting back toward 2A, and Aaliyah, sitting still in her seat, exhaled once more and thought quietly to herself. The storm is coming. The question is how far they're willing to push before it breaks. The plane doors sealed with a muffled thud. The hiss of pressurized air filled the cabin as the engines outside began to whine into motion. Overhead lights dimmed slightly, casting the first-class section in a softer glow. Passengers settled in, buckling belts, powering down phones, yet the air between row 2A and the galley was anything but calm. Victoria Hale stood near the front, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on Dr. Aaliyah Monroe as if she were a problem yet to be solved. Every instinct told her to act, to assert control, to prove she hadn't misread the situation. Years in this job had built her identity around being the gatekeeper of order, and this woman, sitting with such quiet confidence in clothes that looked like they belonged anywhere but first class, was unraveling that certainty thread by thread. She inhaled, straightened her blazer, and strode down the aisle. Daniel Brooks noticed immediately. His gut clenched. He knew that look Victoria wasn't about to offer drinks or blankets. She was about to push. She stopped at row 2A, her shadow falling across Aaliyah's tray table. Aaliyah had reopened her laptop, reviewing slides filled with charts and diagrams. The glow of the screen lit her face in soft blue. She didn't look up when Victoria spoke. Ma'am, Victoria began, voice firmer than before. I'll need to see identification. Right now. Aaliyah's fingers paused on the trackpad. Slowly. She closed the laptop and looked up, her expression calm but unyielding. Why am I being asked again when your colleague already confirmed my name on the manifest? Because I don't believe it's enough, Victoria replied, her jaw tightening. This flight is carrying sensitive clients. I can't allow a mistake. Daniel stepped forward quickly. Victoria, we're cleared. HQ verified her boarding. You're crossing a line. But Victoria didn't move, didn't back down. Her eyes locked onto Aaliyah's as if daring her to resist. You can either show me who you really are, or you can wait outside while we sort this out. The words landed like a challenge in the quiet cabin. A hush spread across the seats. The Whitmans lowered their newspapers, pretending to read, but clearly hanging on every word. Even the low hum of the engine seemed to fade beneath the weight of the standoff. Aaliyah rose slowly from her seat, taller than Victoria by a few inches. She looked her directly in the eye. Her voice remained soft, but the edge in it cut like glass. "I didn't think I was anybody." "You did." The statement hung heavy in the air. Daniel stepped closer, trying to insert himself between the two women. "Let's dial it back," he urged. "We've got clearance. Everything is fine." But Victoria wasn't hearing it. Her pride flared hotter than her reason. She looked past Daniel, her voice lowering into something sharper. "This kind of entitlement doesn't fly here. This is a professional environment, not a casual hangout." Something inside Aaliyah's chest shifted. She had endured these words in boardrooms, in meetings where men twice her age dismissed her proposals until another man repeated them louder. She had endured them in banks where clerks questioned checks signed with her own name. She had endured them in airports where security pulled her aside while others walked past unbothered. But here, at 30,000 feet waiting to happen, the sting was sharper because it was so public, so blatant. Her voice stayed steady. "Entitlement," she repeated. "What you see isn't entitlement. It's existence. And the fact that it unsettles you that says more about you than it does about me." Victoria's cheeks flushed crimson. She took a step closer, her hand twitching as though to guide Aaliyah toward the aisle. "If you won't cooperate, I'll have to escort you myself." Aaliyah's eyes hardened. She pulled her arm back as Victoria reached out. "Don't touch me." That should have ended it. That should have been the moment Victoria realized she had gone too far. But ego can be louder than training, and in that instant, her ego roared. She muttered under her breath, "I'm not doing this today." And then, without warning, she raised her hand and slapped Aaliyah hard across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Time seemed to stop. Daniel gasped audibly. Margaret Whitman's magazine slipped from her hands. Richard froze, his mouth slightly open, eyes wide in disbelief. A couple of heads farther back turned at the noise, their faces etched in confusion. Aaliyah didn't stagger. She didn't lash back. Her head tilted slightly from the impact, her cheek stinging hot, but her body remained still. Slowly, she raised one hand to touch the side of her face. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel broke it first. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice trembled with shock and fury. She," Victoria stammered, her confidence draining as fast as the color in her face. "I was trying to get her to leave." "You assaulted a passenger," Daniel snapped, his voice carrying through the cabin. "Do you understand that you assaulted her?" Aaliyah lowered her hand from her cheek. Her eyes were calm, unreadable, as if she had stepped outside the moment and was observing it from somewhere higher. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't even frown. She simply watched, silent, while the weight of what had just happened settled on everyone else. Victoria's breathing quickened, panic flickering in her eyes as realization began to dawn. Her hand shook where it rested at her side. The Whitmans stared, unable to look away, their earlier smugness now replaced with unease. Aaliyah sat back down slowly, smoothing her hoodie as she did. She pulled her laptop onto her lap again and opened it, her fingers steady as they returned to the keyboard. She didn't type. She just let the screen glow fill the space between her and the chaos around her. Her silence was louder than any scream could have been. The sound still lingered in the air, sharp and undeniable. For a moment, the plane seemed suspended, not just in altitude, but in time. Every passenger, every crew member, every vibration of the engines felt muted beneath the echo of what had just happened. Dr. Aaliyah Monroe sat in her seat, her cheek stinging from the strike, but her presence as calm as if she had rehearsed this moment all her life. The only sign of what happened was the faint red mark blooming across her skin. Her silence was a statement, one more powerful than anger could have been. Daniel Brooks stood frozen a few feet away, his fists clenched, his breath shallow. He had seen arguments on planes before rowdy passengers, entitled guests, tense exchanges, but nothing like this. Nothing that cut so directly to the core of what was right and wrong. He took a shaky step closer. "Victoria, you just hit her," he said, his voice low, trembling with disbelief. Victoria Hale's mouth opened, then closed again. Her composure, so carefully built over decades of work, was unraveling. I was just trying to what?" Daniel snapped, his voice sharper now. "To humiliate her. To force her off a plane she's legally on. You crossed the line. Victoria, no, forget the line. You destroyed it. From the back." Richard Whitman cleared his throat. His voice carried, deep and hesitant. "That was unnecessary. She didn't do anything." Margaret elbowed him, whispering harshly, "Don't get involved." But the damage was already done. Other passengers were whispering now. Heads turned, eyes darting between Aaliyah, Victoria, and Daniel. Aaliyah remained still, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard of her laptop. She wasn't typing. She wasn't reading. She was simply there, letting the silence stretch until it pressed against every chest in the cabin. Finally, she spoke. "You think you've revealed something about me?" she said softly, her voice even. "But all you've revealed is yourself." The words sliced through the tension. Victoria swallowed hard, her throat dry, her face pale. The cockpit door cracked open, and Captain Jonathan Reed stepped out. His tall frame filled the narrow aisle, his silver hair neat beneath his cap. He scanned the cabin, immediately sensing the disturbance. His eyes landed on Victoria, then on Aaliyah's reddened cheek. "What's going on here?" His voice was calm but firm, the kind that brooked no nonsense. Daniel was the first to answer. "Captain, Victoria assaulted a passenger. She struck Dr. Monroe across the face." The captain's eyes flicked to Aaliyah. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just sat, composed, her gaze steady as though waiting for him to make his own conclusion. "Is this true?" Captain Reed asked, his tone heavy with the weight of protocol. Victoria's lips parted, trembling. She refused to cooperate." "I thought you thought wrong," the captain interrupted, his voice sharpening. "You never, under any circumstance, lay hands on a passenger, especially not like that." The older couple in the back shifted uncomfortably. Margaret whispered something under her breath, but Richard said nothing. His eyes stayed on Aaliyah, and for the first time, there was something like respect there. The captain exhaled, running a hand down his face. "We need to resolve this before we leave the ground. Dr. Monroe, do you wish to press charges?" All eyes turned to her. Aaliyah closed her laptop slowly, resting her hands on top of it. "No," she said. Her voice was soft, but the firmness underneath made everyone lean closer. "We're flying." Victoria blinked in disbelief. You're letting this go." Aaliyah looked at her directly, her gaze unwavering. "No, I'm letting you sit here with what you've done. That will weigh more than any lawsuit." The silence after her words was heavier than before. Victoria's knees felt weak beneath her, her hands trembling at her sides. Daniel glanced at Aaliyah, then back at the captain. "She's right. Removing Victoria now will only escalate things. Let her stay. The cameras recorded everything." Victoria's face blanched. She had forgotten about the cameras. Every inch of the cabin, every gesture, every word recorded, archived, reviewable. There was no undoing it. Captain Reed nodded grimly. "Then we continue. But Victoria, consider yourself relieved of service for the remainder of this flight. Sit in your jump seat. Do not interact with passengers again." The words landed like a final gavel. Victoria swallowed hard and nodded, retreating toward the galley. Each step felt heavier than the last, her world shrinking with every stride. Daniel turned to Aaliyah, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" "I've been through worse," Aaliyah replied simply. She opened her notebook now, not the laptop, and scribbled a single line before closing it again. "What did you write?" Daniel asked quietly. Aaliyah gave a faint smile. "A reminder that silence can be stronger than sound." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it in his chest. The engines roared louder as the plane began to taxi down the runway. The hum of motion replaced the brittle silence, but the tension remained. Passengers pretended to read or nap, but their eyes flicked open every few moments, drawn again to Aaliyah's calm composure, the mark on her cheek still visible. Margaret leaned toward Richard. "She's making a show of it, acting like she's above it all." Richard shook his head. "No, she's not acting. She is above it." Margaret didn't reply. She sank back into her seat, suddenly uncomfortable in a way she couldn't name. Meanwhile, Sophia Martinez, seated a few rows back, angled her phone discreetly. She had captured the slap, the silence, the captain's arrival. The video was crisp, clear, undeniable. She pressed upload, her heart racing. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the world would already know. Aaliyah didn't notice, or if she did, she gave no sign. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the rhythm of the engines steady her thoughts. She had chosen patience over retaliation, silence over spectacle. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much larger. Because when the plane landed, the real storm would begin. 15 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. The cabin lights warmed slightly, washing first class in a gentle glow. Conversations resumed in cautious whispers, thin veils over the memory of a sound no one could forget. Dr. Aaliyah Monroe kept her posture steady, eyes half closed as if she were resting. But her mind was awake and alert. Beneath the hum of the engines, she tracked the rhythm of the room, the rustle of a magazine page, the click of a tablet case, the faint quiver in a breath 2 rows behind. Tension has a way of making people loud even when they don't speak. Near the galley, Daniel Brooks checked the inventory list for the 3rd time. He wasn't reading it. He was buying a few seconds to decide what to do next. His pulse had settled, but the anger lived on, quiet and bright. He looked toward the jump seat where Victoria Hale sat rigid, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. The red patch on Aaliyah's cheek haunted him. It should never have happened. The cockpit door opened a crack. Captain Jonathan Reed stepped out, his face composed, the kind of neutral that comes from years of emergencies and near misses and problems solved mid-air. He beckoned to Daniel with 2 fingers. In the narrow space outside the flight deck, he lowered his voice. "I've contacted operations," he said. I want the full picture before we decide anything else." Daniel nodded. "Good." The captain studied him a beat. "You okay?" "Not really." "Me neither," Reed said. "Stay close." He re-entered the cockpit. "The door sealed?" Daniel took a breath, then another. He glanced toward 2A. Aaliyah's eyes were open now, focused, calm. He felt an impulse rise respect mixed with protectiveness, and he moved down the aisle to check on her. "Dr. Monroe," he said quietly, "can I get you water? Tea? Still water, please," she said. He returned with the bottle, set it on her tray, and hesitated. "If you need anything else, anything. I'm here." Aaliyah studied his face for a moment. "Thank you." "Daniel." The way she said his name, steady and unforced, eased something tight in his chest. He stepped back. Behind him, Margaret Whitman leaned toward her husband, voice a whisper trying to be invisible. "I looked it up," she murmured. "People can fake names on manifests. I read a story about it." Richard shifted in his seat. "That's not what happened here. How do you know he didn't answer?" He didn't have proof, just a feeling, heavy and certain. 3 rows back. Sophia Martinez turned her phone screen to low brightness. The upload status bar crept forward. In-flight Wi-Fi was slow but relentless. The clip, 32 seconds, clear enough to catch the arc of a hand, and the stillness that followed was nearly live. Her caption was simple. "This happened on my flight. No one should be treated like this." She hesitated over the post button, then pressed it. Inside the cockpit, a soft ping landed on Captain Reed's screen. Operations sent a message, flagged urgent confirm passenger 20 identity. Possible VIP. Do not engage without HQ. He frowned, tapped to open the secure channel. And a second message arrived, this time with a name. He read it once, then again, a chill moving through him like cool air in a pressurized cabin. "Monroe," he said under his breath. He picked up the handset and patched through to ground. The voice on the other end was clipped. "Careful." "Yes." They confirmed. "Yes." 2A was real. "Yes." She was important, more than important. The words majority owner cut through any remaining doubt. The captain thanked them, ended the call, and for a long second watched the altimeter scroll as the aircraft climbed. When he stepped back into the cabin, his expression had changed. There was resolve in it now, a recentering of gravity. He walked to row 2A and leaned slightly, keeping his voice private. "Dr. Monroe," he said, "would you be willing to join me for a brief conversation in the conference nook? It's quiet there." Her eyes met his, calm, curious. Of course. He led her past the galley, past Victoria's rigid silence, to a small space tucked behind a frosted divider, 2 facing seats, a small table, sound-dampening walls. Daniel hovered a respectful distance back, then gently closed the divider behind them. Reed sat, folding his hands. "I've confirmed with headquarters. I know who you are." Aaliyah didn't blink. "And who is that?" "Captain Doctor." "Aaliyah Monroe," he said, voice steady. "CEO of Monroe Dynamics and majority owner of Aerosky Airways." The words didn't echo, but the truth in them did. The captain inclined his head. "I want to apologize, personally, for what happened to you on my aircraft." Aaliyah held his gaze. "I appreciate the apology, but you know that's not enough." He nodded. "I do." For a moment, the room was quiet, aircraft quiet, the kind you feel more than hear. Aaliyah opened her leather notebook and placed it on the table. The page inside bore a single sentence, written neatly in black ink. She turned it toward him, Strength is not in how loud you answer. It read, "It's in how steady you remain when others try to shake you." Reed read it once, then looked up. "You remained steady?" "I did," she said. "But steadiness without change is just endurance." She tapped the notebook lightly. "I plan to present a reform package at tomorrow's shareholder meeting, training, reporting, cabin oversight, accountability tied to promotion. It was going to roll out next quarter." She closed the notebook. "I'm done waiting." Reed's mind moved quickly through the operational implications, the human ones, the message to his crew. "If you want it pushed now," he said, "I'll support it. You have my word." "Support is a start," she replied. "Enforcement is the work." He nodded again, slower this time, the gravity of the moment settling into his posture. Understood. From beyond the divider, the cabin murmured. News travels strangely at altitude, not in words, but in looks passed along, shoulders shifting, the quiet contagion of a rumor forming. A gentle knock at the divider and Daniel's voice. "Careful. Captain Dr. Monroe." "Sorry to interrupt." Reed opened the panel. Daniel leaned in slightly. "Ops just pushed a memo to our crew devices. There's a VIP tag on 2A. It's getting attention?" Aaliyah tilted her head. "Attention," how Daniel swallowed. "People will know soon." Reed rose. "I'll make a statement to the crew. We'll maintain order." Aaliyah stood as well. Order would be good. They returned to the cabin. The space felt different now, like a room that had rearranged itself while no one was looking. Reed paused by the galley and spoke low to the interphone, directing a quick huddle among the crew. He kept it simple, professional conduct, de-escalation, no further contact from Victoria. All service routed through Daniel. His voice carried the weight of command. As he ended the call, a notification buzzed on Daniel's wrist. He glanced at his smartwatch. A headline flashed. "Short and stark passenger assaulted in first class. Witness claims." He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The future of this flight had already tilted. Aaliyah returned to 2A. As she sat, Richard Whitman cleared his throat. His voice was softer than before. "Ma'am," he said, "for what it's worth, I'm sorry for what happened. It shouldn't have." She studied him for a second, measuring not the apology, but the space it occupied. "Thank you," she said. "It shouldn't have, and yet it did. That's the problem I'm here to solve." Margaret looked down, embarrassed by how small her earlier certainty felt now. On the jump seat, Victoria stared at the floor. The pieces were falling into place, and none favored her. She could feel the word forming before anyone said it. Owner. Not celebrity, not influencer. Owner. The realization hollowed her out. She wanted to run, to explain, to rewrite the last hour with better decisions. Time wouldn't move backward. Daniel approached her quietly. "You will have to give a statement," he said, his voice professional, but not unkind. She nodded without looking up. "I know." "Sit tight," he added. "Don't speak to passengers." "Understood." He returned to service, stopping once more at 2A. "Dr. Monroe, would you like anything else?" She thought for a moment. "A cup of hot water," she said, "and a pen." He blinked, surprised by the simplicity. "Right away." As he moved to the galley, Sophia's phone buzzed again. The upload had finished. Notifications bloomed like sparks. She watched the screen for 2 heartbeats, then put the phone face down on her tray table. She glanced toward Aaliyah and felt her chest tighten with a mixture of guilt and determination. The truth needed air. It also needed care. Daniel returned with the hot water and a fresh pen. Aliyah set the notebook on her tray and wrote 4 words in firm, patient strokes. Equity first. Starting now. She capped the pen, closed the book, and lifted the cup to her lips. The water's heat steadied her. Out the window. The country stretched in patchwork below desert to mountain to plains. A quiet geography under a loud sky. She inhaled slowly. When the world found out, and it would. Soon she wanted to be ready, not just with outrage, but with a blueprint. Anger can burn a moment. Structure can change a culture. The captain walked the aisle one last time before returning to the cockpit. He paused at 2A. "We'll land clean," he said, "and we'll do what needs to be done." Aliyah nodded. "Yes," she replied. "We will." The aircraft had leveled off at cruising altitude. Outside the windows, clouds stretched like endless fields of white cotton. But inside, the cabin felt anything but light. Tension pooled in the narrow aisles, heavy enough that even the hum of the engines couldn't drown it out. "Doctor." Aliyah Monroe sat quietly in seat 2A, her leather notebook now closed, her fingers resting lightly on the cover. Her calm demeanor unsettled nearly everyone on board. Calm, after all, can be louder than shouting. Calm can turn into judgment without a single word. Victoria Hale shifted in her jump seat, every muscle tight. The memory of her hand striking Aliyah replayed in her mind again and again, as if her body couldn't believe what it had done. She wanted to speak, to explain, to beg, but she knew the captain's order was final. She was barred from speaking to passengers, her authority stripped mid-flight. She had never felt so small in her own cabin. Daniel Brooks busied himself with service. He placed drinks on trays, checked call buttons, adjusted blankets. His hands moved quickly, but his eyes kept flicking toward 2A. He admired the way Aliyah handled herself still, graceful, unshaken. He had seen executives lose their tempers over less, but she was made of something different. Further back, Richard and Margaret Whitman sat stiffly, pretending to focus on the in-flight magazine. But every few minutes, Richard's eyes wandered to Aliyah. For the first time, he questioned the assumptions he had carried onto this flight. Margaret caught his glance and whispered, "Don't stare." But he shook his head slightly. "I wasn't staring. I was thinking." She said nothing more. Across the aisle, Sophia Martinez's phone vibrated nonstop. She had switched the device to silent, but the flood of notifications was impossible to ignore. The video had gone live, and the internet was already alive with outrage. She angled the phone just enough to glimpse a headline. "Flight attendant slaps passenger in first class caught on camera." The video was climbing in views by the thousands, each refresh multiplying faster than the last. Sophia closed the phone, heart racing. She wasn't sure if she had done the right thing, but she knew there was no turning back. Inside the cockpit. "Oh?" Captain Jonathan Reed adjusted the autopilot and glanced at the comms panel. Another urgent message blinked in from headquarters. He read it carefully. "They confirmed again, Doctor." Aliyah Monroe's ownership of Aerosky was not only legitimate, but newly finalized. She wasn't just a VIP, she was the VIP, his employer, his ultimate superior. The irony wasn't lost on him. He closed the message and sighed, feeling the weight of the decision waiting at landing. The company would want answers. The press was already circling, he suspected, and his crew had made a mistake so glaring, so visible, it would become the center of a storm far larger than this flight. Back in the cabin, Daniel approached Aliyah again, Dr. Monroe, he said softly, is there anything else I can get you? Something to eat? She looked up at him, her eyes warm but tired. No, thank you. Daniel, I don't need food. She paused. But I wouldn't mind a little honesty. His brow furrowed. Honesty? Yes, she said, her voice low but steady. Tell me, how often does something like this happen? Not the slap, the suspicion, the questioning. Daniel hesitated, then lowered his voice even more. More than I'd like to admit. People don't say it outright, but I've seen the looks, the extra ID checks, the way certain passengers are treated differently before they even sit down. Aaliyah nodded slowly. And what do you do when you see it? He swallowed. Sometimes I speak up. Sometimes I stay quiet. I tell myself it's not my fight. But, he glanced at her cheek. Today reminded me that staying quiet doesn't protect anyone. It just lets the worst moments happen. Aaliyah studied him for a moment, then gave a faint smile. You'll do well, Daniel. You already see what others pretend not to. From the galley. Victoria's voice cracked suddenly, louder than she intended. I didn't mean to. She stopped herself, realizing too late she had broken the captain's order. Silence crashed back into the cabin, and every head turned toward her. She pressed her lips together, mortified, and sat back down. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't acknowledge her. She simply turned back to her notebook and wrote another line. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately. Richard Whitman strained to read from his seat but couldn't make out the words. Sophia caught the gesture on her phone camera, zooming discreetly. She wasn't planning to post this time. She wanted to remember it for herself, the image of a woman writing calmly after being humiliated, her silence carrying more power than 100 speeches. The minutes stretched. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Every so often, turbulence nudged the cabin, making glasses tremble against trays, making shoulders shift uncomfortably. But no one spoke. No one dared break the strange new order that had settled after the slap. Finally, the intercom buzzed. Captain Reed's voice filled the cabin, steady and formal. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are cruising at 40,000 feet. Weather ahead is smooth. We expect an on-time arrival into Newark. Cabin crew, continue service as planned. His words were ordinary, routine, but under them, everyone heard something else. Stability. A promise that order, at least for now, would hold. Aaliyah closed her notebook, rested her hands on top, and let her eyes drift shut. Her breathing slowed. Her posture remained regal, her silence steady. Around her, the passengers shifted, each processing what they had witnessed, what it meant, and what would come next. And as the aircraft streaked eastward, unseen on the ground below, millions of people were beginning to watch the video Sophia had posted. The world was waking up to what had just happened at 30,000 feet. By the time they landed, nothing would be the same. By the halfway point of the flight, the cabin had grown quieter than a library. The silence wasn't restful. It was taut, like a rope stretched too far. Every shift of a newspaper, every click of a seatbelt, every clink of ice in a glass seemed magnified, layered over the memory of that single slap. Dr. Aaliyah Monroe sat upright, her gaze steady on the clouds outside. The bruise on her cheek was faint now, a shadow more than a mark, but it carried the weight of everything that had shifted in the air. She knew what Sophia's phone was doing 3 rows back. She could feel the ripple moving outward into the world, and she didn't stop it. Some truths needed air. In the galley, Daniel Brooks leaned against the counter, scrolling quickly on his crew tablet. The in-flight Wi-Fi was sluggish, but a message finally loaded. His eyes widened. A trending alert. The video was already viral, over 300,000 views in under an hour. Hashtags multiplying across every platform. The comments scrolled faster than he could read. Anger, disbelief, solidarity, outrage. The storm was building at ground level, even while they floated above the earth. Daniel exhaled and shut the screen, pressing a hand to his forehead. He didn't know what scared him more, the slap itself, or the fact that millions of strangers already knew about it. Meanwhile, Victoria Hale's mind spun in her jump seat. She felt trapped inside her own skin, her uniform suddenly suffocating. She thought about her 6 years of loyalty, her spotless record, her promotions earned through late nights and double shifts. All of it felt like sand running through her fingers. One moment, one mistake, and it's gone. She stole a glance toward 2A. Aaliyah hadn't spoken to her since the strike. That silence was unbearable, louder than shouting, heavier than any lecture. Victoria wanted to apologize again, but her captain's order still echoed in her ears. Do not speak to passengers. Breaking it once had nearly undone her. Breaking it again might finish her career completely. Margaret Whitman dabbed at her forehead with a silk handkerchief, whispering to her husband, "If this goes to the press, Richard, it'll be a scandal. People will say we were there. Our names could be dragged into it." Richard shook his head. "The scandal isn't being here. The scandal is what happened." Margaret stiffened, unused to hearing that tone in his voice. He turned the page of his magazine without reading, his eyes restless. Sophia Martinez kept her phone flat on the tray table, face down. She had already received direct messages from news outlets, requests for interviews, permissions to use the video, offers of money. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't posted it for fame. She had posted it because silence had become unbearable. Now she was part of something larger than herself, something she couldn't take back. Inside the cockpit, Captain Jonathan Reed received another ping from headquarters. This time the message was sharper, more urgent video circulating online. Confirmed details, contained situation until landing, legal preparing response. Reed closed his eyes briefly. Contain, a word that meant hold still, keep calm, suppress until control returned. But he knew control was already gone. The moment Victoria's hand had connected with Aaliyah's cheek, the narrative had left their cabin and entered the world. He switched on the intercom to Daniel's handset. "Status," Daniel answered quietly, glancing toward 2A. Passengers calm, but they know. The air feels heavy. Reed sighed. "Do your best. We'll face it on the ground." Back in her seat, Aaliyah pulled out her pen and notebook again. She wrote in clean, deliberate strokes. "The world only sees when it's forced to look. Make them look." She paused, tapped the pen against the page, then underlined the words. Daniel appeared beside her with a fresh bottle of water. She looked up and caught the tension in his face. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked softly. His eyes flickered, startled. "The video." She nodded. "Yes," he admitted. "It's everywhere already. By the time we land, there'll be cameras waiting." Aaliyah exhaled slowly. "Good." Daniel frowned. "Good. The world pretends not to notice things like this when they happen in quiet rooms," she said. "But put it on a screen. Let them watch it unfold in real time. And suddenly people care. Outrage makes noise. Noise forces change." Her calmness unnerved him, but also steadied him. It was as if she had expected this all along, from the jump seat. Victoria's chest tightened at their words. Cameras, outrage, change. Each word pressed harder against her ribcage. She thought of her mortgage, her daughter's tuition, her reputation. She thought of the way people would look at her when her name became tied to this. No one would remember 6 years of service. They would only remember the slap. She blinked back tears, clenching her hands in her lap. Her pride wanted her to justify it, to tell herself she was protecting the cabin, following instinct. But deep down, she knew the truth. It hadn't been about safety. It had been about judgment, a single, poisonous assumption. In the back row, Richard Whitman finally set his magazine down. He leaned across the aisle toward Sophia, speaking in a low voice. "You posted it, didn't you?" Sophia hesitated, then nodded. His jaw tightened. The world will be brutal to her. Sophia looked at him evenly. The world should be brutal to what she did. Otherwise, nothing changes. Richard didn't argue. He sat back, rubbing his temples. The cabin shifted again when Captain Reed emerged from the cockpit. He stood tall in the aisle, his presence commanding even without words. The murmurs stilled. "I want to address the cabin," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We are aware of what happened earlier. It is being reviewed. Our priority now is safety, professionalism, and completing this flight without further incident. Thank you for your cooperation." It was a short statement, measured and cautious. But to the passengers, it confirmed what they already knew: this wasn't going away. Aaliyah watched him return to the cockpit. She didn't speak, but a faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She could feel the balance shifting now, not toward revenge, but toward accountability. Victoria noticed the smile. It cut her deeper than any words could. For the first time in years, she doubted not just her job, but herself. Sophia's phone buzzed again. She turned it over, this time unable to resist looking. The video had crossed 1.5 million views. Hashtags were trending. Justice Attendant Co. Fly with respect. Oh, de Monroe. Her eyes widened at the last one. Somehow, the world already knew Aaliyah's name. She glanced at 2A. The billionaire wasn't just a mystery passenger anymore. She was a symbol, and symbols have power beyond the people they represent. Aaliyah rested her pen on the notebook. She could sense the shift in the air, the way eyes followed her now not with suspicion, but with awe, curiosity, and even respect. She didn't crave it, but she knew how to use it. The plane surged eastward, carrying not just its passengers, but the weight of a story unfolding in real time. By the time the wheels touched Newark asphalt, they would all be part of something larger than themselves. For now, at 40,000 feet. Silence returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was expectant, waiting for the landing, waiting for the reckoning. The announcement came with the familiar chime. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be beginning our initial descent into Newark shortly. Weather on arrival is clear, with a mild breeze. Estimated landing time is 35 minutes. The words were ordinary, routine, but in the cabin of Flight 227, they carried a different weight. This descent wasn't only into an airport, it was into consequences, into headlines, into a reality none of them could escape. Dr. Aaliyah Monroe opened her eyes slowly, pulling herself from the quiet meditation she had maintained. She straightened her seatbelt, closed her notebook, and set it carefully in her leather bag. The preparation wasn't just for landing, it was for everything waiting on the ground. Daniel Brooks walked the aisle, collecting stray cups and checking seat backs. His hands moved automatically, but his thoughts churned. He had watched the view counter on Sophia's phone climb from thousands to millions in under 2 hours. The slap that had frozen their cabin was now frozen on screens across the world. He glanced at Aaliyah as he passed. She sat steady, poised, her gaze fixed forward. Daniel envied that calm, though he didn't yet understand how much of it was discipline and how much was choice. Victoria Hale shifted in her jump seat near the galley. Every muscle in her body ached with dread. She had replayed the moment endlessly, searching for a way to rewrite it in her mind. But no matter how she twisted the memory, the outcome was always the same. Her hand rising, her palm connecting, the impossible silence after. She imagined the headlines, her name, her face, her disgrace. Sweat pricked at the back of her neck. Margaret Whitman leaned close to her husband. "Richard, this will be chaos when we land. Reporters, cameras, statements. Should we even walk through the terminal with them?" Richard didn't answer right away. He studied Aaliyah across the aisle, a woman who had carried herself with more grace and humiliation than most men did in triumph. "Finally," he said, "if we walk away now, we'll look like cowards. Better to stand in truth than hide in shadows." Margaret frowned, unused to such conviction in his tone, but she didn't argue. Sophia Martinez gripped her phone tightly, the glow of the screen lighting her anxious features. Notifications flooded in faster than she could process. National outlets, international news, hashtags in multiple languages. Her stomach flipped. She hadn't expected it to travel this far, this fast. She glanced at Aaliyah, guilt rippling through her. She didn't ask for this. I just couldn't let it vanish into silence. The plane dipped slightly, the sensation of descent pressing into everyone's bodies. The clouds outside grew denser, streaks of gray against the fading afternoon sky. Captain Jonathan Reed stepped briefly into the cabin, his presence steadying like ballast. He caught Daniel's eye, then Aaliyah's. "We'll have a secure escort upon landing," he said quietly. "Ground control has arranged a private gate, but the press already knows." Aaliyah nodded once. "Let them know. I have nothing to hide." Her words were simple, but Daniel felt their weight. He realized then that she wasn't just bracing for fallout. She was preparing to lead it. Victoria heard the exchange, and her heart clenched. She wanted to beg, to plead for mercy, to explain that she had acted from fear, not malice, but she knew how little those words would matter. She had been reduced from authority to an example, a case study of failure, and she feared the world would never let her be more than that again. As the seatbelt sign dinged on, the cabin shifted into quiet compliance. Passengers adjusted their seats, buckled in, tucked away belongings, but their eyes kept drifting toward 2A, as if Aaliyah were the true announcement, the center of everything. Sophia whispered into her phone's voice recorder, a habit from her work. "It's strange," she murmured softly. "Everyone here is holding their breath, but she's the only one breathing normally, like she's been here before, in 1,000 different rooms, facing the same story. And maybe she has." She stopped recording and slipped the phone into her bag, her throat tight. The city came into view below, sprawling and restless, bridges like threads of steel, neighborhoods patchworked in sunlight, the wide silver line of the Hudson reflecting the setting sun. To most passengers, it looked like homecoming. To Aaliyah, it looked like a battlefield dressed in glass and concrete. Daniel moved past her one final time. He whispered, "Are you ready?" She turned her head just slightly, enough for him to see the calm in her eyes. "I was born ready for this," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of truth. As the landing gear deployed with a muffled thud, the aircraft shuddered slightly. Aaliyah placed her palms on her knees, grounding herself in the vibration. She wasn't bracing for impact. She was anchoring for history. When the tires touched down on Newark asphalt, the roar of rubber against runway filled the cabin. Applause didn't break out. Relief didn't ripple. Instead, there was silence, a silence not of fear, but of expectation. Everyone knew the real turbulence was waiting on the ground. The jet slowed along the runway, engines reversing with a thunder that rattled water in plastic cups. Newark's terminals flashed by in strips of glass and steel. In the front galley, Daniel Brooks braced a palm against the counter and felt a strange quiet settle inside him, the kind that follows a storm but comes before the work. The aircraft turned off the active runway and taxied toward a private gate. Out the window, a thin line of vehicles waited airport operations, security, 2 unmarked SUVs, a van with a local station's logo parked at a distance behind a cordon, cameras lifted like sunflowers following light. "Doctor?" Aaliyah Monroe tightened the strap on her leather bag and sat tall, palms resting on her knees. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a tender warmth, but the memory was as clear as a photograph. She breathed in, breathed out, and let the breath carry the last of the sting away. What remained wasn't pain, it was purpose. Captain Jonathan Reed stood in the doorway to the cockpit as the plane eased into the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said over the PA, his voice even, "we've arrived. For safety, please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off. We will deplane in an orderly sequence. Thank you for your cooperation." He clicked off the microphone and caught Aaliyah's eye with a nod. A promise. "We'll do this right." The chime sounded, seatbelts unlatched, and the familiar rustle began. Yet no one in first class stood. They were waiting for direction, for permission, for something they couldn't name. Aaliyah rose first. She didn't hurry. She didn't scan for cameras. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out her notebook and the capped pen Daniel had fetched mid-flight, and tucked them into the crook of her arm. Victoria Hale unbuckled from the jump seat on shaking legs. She didn't look up. She smoothed her uniform with trembling hands, as if neat fabric could hold together what the day had torn. Captain Reed stepped into the aisle. "Ms. Hale," he said quietly, "security will meet you at the jet bridge. Give a factual statement, no commentary. I will brief HQ. After that, report to crew relations." Her throat bobbed. "Yes, Captain, and Victoria," he added, tone steady. "Today doesn't end with this flight, but what you choose next matters." She nodded without trusting her voice. Airport operations opened the door and cold air washed in, smelling faintly of jet fuel and rain. Security formed a respectful corridor, no hands, no spectacle. Daniel moved to the front to coordinate deplaning and, without quite meaning to, positioned himself between Aaliyah and the door like a quiet shield. Sophia Martinez slipped her phone into her jacket pocket. She looked at Aaliyah, started to speak, then stopped. She didn't owe an explanation. She owed truth. Aaliyah's glance met hers steady, knowing, not unkind. Sophia exhaled and mouthed a single word. "Sorry." Aaliyah's answering nod was small but real. Richard Whitman stood and cleared his throat. "Dr. Monroe," he said, voice careful. "If there's a statement to be given, if witnesses are needed, we'll do it." He glanced at Margaret, who met Aaliyah's gaze with a thin, sincere nod. "We saw enough to say something," Margaret added. quieter than before. "We should have said it sooner." "Thank you," Aaliyah said. "Speak plainly. That's all this needs." The procession began. Security allowed Aaliyah to step into the jet bridge with Captain Reed and Daniel at her side. Cameras waited beyond the barrier, held back by airport police. Microphones reached like branches in wind. The first questions came fast, fracturing the air. "Dr. Monroe, were you assaulted by crew? Are you pressing charges? Is Aerosky issuing an apology today?" She stopped at the line, not crossing, not shrinking. Her voice, when it came, was made for microphones and rooms without them. "I was struck," she said, "on my airline, by a person entrusted with passenger care. I am not pressing charges at this time. Accountability will happen through policy and through culture, not just punishment. This is not about a single person and a single moment. This is about what we normalize at 40,000 feet and on the ground, a rush of follow-ups." She lifted a hand not to silence, but to pace. "Here is what will happen, starting now." She continued, "Aerosky is implementing the Equity First program effective immediately. Mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training for all frontline and flight crew. Measured and refreshed every quarter. Independent incident review with passenger representation. A cabin conduct charter posted at every gate and in every seatback. Anonymous reporting that ties to performance evaluations and promotion. And because transparency matters, aggregate quarterly reporting on complaints and outcomes, available to the public." A murmur swept the crowd. A journalist called, "What about the flight attendant?" Another, "Is this optics?" Aaliyah didn't flinch. "Ms. Hale is removed from duty pending investigation. She will be offered entry into a comprehensive realignment program education, supervised probation, public acknowledgement of harm. If she completes it with measurable improvement, she will have a path forward. Accountability and the possibility of growth can coexist. That's how cultures heal." She let the cameras hold on that for a beat, then stepped back. No further comments until the board briefing. "Thank you." Captain Reed leaned in. "We can move you to the car." "I'll walk," she said. People need to see the line between words and movement. They crossed the private corridor. Daniel kept pace, a half step behind. "That was precise," he said softly. "Precision changes systems," she replied. "Anger alone changes headlines." In a conference room above the gate, senior staff and legal counsel waited. The atmosphere was tight paper cups, muted screens, a hum of controlled urgency. A board member on video started with jargon. "We can frame this as an isolated no," Aaliyah said, taking the head of the table without asking. "We won't dilute what happened. We won't gaslight the public. We won't spin. We'll tell the truth, fix the structure, and let the results speak for us." She slid her notebook forward and opened to a page already marked. Bullet points, timelines, owners. She assigned names. Training within 30 days. Reporting infrastructure in 60. Public dashboard in 90. Independent review panel in place before the next quarter. Bonuses tied to compliance and outcomes, not just on-time performance. The room shifted from defense to execution. You could feel it, the click of an organization leaving denial and entering work. Daniel stood near the door, absorbing the pace. He had never seen leadership move like this, not loud, not grandstanding, just relentless. He realized then that what had felt like calm all flight wasn't calm at all. It was discipline, aimed like a tool. There was a knock. Security brought Victoria to the threshold with a liaison from crew relations. She looked smaller without the aisle, without the frame of authority. For a second, her eyes found Aaliyah's and dropped. Ms. Hale, Aaliyah said, you'll submit a sworn statement, then go home. Someone from training will contact you tomorrow morning at 9. You'll receive the realignment curriculum and a mentor, not from your base. If you choose to enter the program, you'll earn nothing from optics. You will earn only from change. Victoria swallowed. I want to enter it. She managed. I don't expect forgiveness. I expect work. Good, Aaliyah said. Work is the point. Victoria nodded, eyes shining, and left with crew relations. No drama, just direction. An aide slipped a printed sheet to Daniel. He glanced down, press inbox already full, hashtag still climbing. An early surge of customer messages, not with rage, but with relief, some version of the same line repeated. Thank you for saying it out loud. Sophia Martinez waited just outside the room, unsure if she should leave. When Aaliyah stepped out, Sophia straightened. I didn't post for attention, she said quickly. I posted because I've been the person no one believed. It felt wrong to sit still. I know, Aaliyah said. Keep the original file. If anyone pressures you, send them to counsel. And next time, if there is a next time, make sure you blur faces that aren't necessary. Protect bystanders. Protect victims. Sophia nodded. Yes, ma'am. Aaliyah smiled. It's Aaliyah. Down on the curb, the evening air tasted like rain on hot concrete. The SUVs idled. Cameras hovered across the perimeter line. Red tally lights like small, unblinking eyes. Daniel opened the rear door, then paused. Before you go, he said, I wanted to say, today taught me that quiet isn't neutral. I don't want to be neutral anymore. She held his gaze. Then don't be. See it. Say it. And when you can, structure it. He grinned, despite the day. Yes, ma'am. She slid into the back seat, set her notebook on her lap, and uncapped the pen one more time. 4 words, neat and steady respect before title. Always. The car pulled from the curb. Behind them, the terminal glowed in the early dusk. Somewhere above, a new departure roared into the sky metal. Engines and human hands working in concert. The kind of collaboration that makes flight possible. The kind she intended to bring back to the ground. This story reminds us that dignity is not about titles, money, or even power. It's about how we treat each other in the most ordinary of moments. The black CEO who was humiliated could have exploded in anger, but instead chose restraint, clarity, and accountability. That choice didn't just change his own outcome. It changed the culture of an entire airline. For older viewers, the lesson is timeless. Every generation faces its tests of respect and justice. Many of us know what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, or judged too quickly. What matters most is not only how we endure, but how we respond. Do we meet prejudice with silence, or do we shape that silence into strength? In life, we may not own an airline, but we all own our choices. We can either look away, or we can decide to act with integrity and insist on fairness. Change often begins in the quietest of moments when someone chooses accountability over anger, compassion over revenge. It's never too late to be the person who says respect must come before status. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your time and presence mean more than words can capture. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, so together we can keep telling stories that honor dignity, challenge injustice, and inspire change.